Hello and what is up, YouTube? My name is G3Iron, and today we are back with our 7th episode of our featured weekly build discussion. This week we are featuring BrittleKnee's Darkness Farmer. This is a Scion build that is specifically made to print you currency while not killing any monsters and simply interacting with Delve. Those of you who are new to Path of Exile over the last year or so, maybe you weren't around when darkness farming was a thing way back in Delve League of August of 2018, but no worries, you can still experience all of the joys and all of the currency and all of the profits that come alongside darkness farming. That's still available in Path of Exile 3.9. So we're going to get into all of the ins and outs of this particular build, but first off, of course, credit goes to the build guide creator. This is, of course, BrittleKnee. You can go and give her a like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about more of her videos that come out featuring this particular build. You can see this is a pacifist style of gameplay, and it is a great gameplay for printing currency. Those of you who are at a point in the league or a point in your gameplay who are just wondering, how do I go from the amount of currency that I have now and get current, consistent returns on my playtime? Darkness farming is going to be for you. A couple of other videos to shout out. Also wanted to give a shout out to Kurgama Live, which of course I'm going to go and ding and subscribe to his channel as well. He does a great overview on how to interact with Delve farming in general, and it's about a 20-minute video, so if you're just looking for an overview on how to actually farm in the darkness and want something that's a little bit longer than the build guide, I would recommend watching that. And then lastly, of course, I will shamelessly promote, we had a discussion on low-level farming and if it's a good thing or not all the way back in January of 2019, so if you want to view that, of course, all of these links, including the path of building, are located down below in the video description. And of course, if you've got questions, you can drop a comment down below, and either myself or another one of our community members will be happy to help you out. So, all of that being said, what exactly is the appeal of darkness farming? Well, here are the pros and the cons to darkness farming. First off, you can print money. So with absolutely no investment cap beyond the initial cost of putting the build together and running down to whatever depth it is that you are going to farm in Delve, you can then farm repeatedly with no continual additional costs. You don't have to alch and go, you don't have to acquire maps, you don't have to necessarily spend any upgrades in order to continue to progress your Delve depth, you don't have to trade for fragments in order to kill bosses, you don't have to get more sockets or more watchstones in order to get more conquerors to drop or to spawn in order to hopefully fight Cirrus, in order to then have potentially a bugged encounter. You can simply avoid all of that and just print currency without any additional expenditures except for the initial build costs. That, for a lot of players, in and of itself, is going to be a pro enough to get you and convince you to play this particular build. Another pro is that it's self-sufficient. So if you're a crafter or you want to get started in crafting but you don't currently have a lot of currency, there are a whole ton of players out there who want to get started in crafting and who have seen what sorts of monstrosities you can craft in Path of Exile, but maybe you're too scared to get started with crafting because you just don't have the currency and you don't want to risk losing or using your currency that you do have because it's maybe a low supply. You can go out and farm your own fossils for yourself and then use them to craft your own creations, either for your own build or to sell and trade in a trade league. Then, of course, there are some cons to this particular build, and I always like to share those cons. I really don't like featuring builds that don't share the cons, and there are some cons to darkness farming. First off, it's very repetitive. As BrittleKnee says, in the end, like most farming, you'll be doing the same thing over and over and over. It can be boring or fun, depending on your personal temperament. So, if you don't like doing the same thing over and over again, yeah, darkness farming isn't probably going to be for you. That being said, if you like maybe putting something on a second screen or watching something on your phone or the television, all while you're farming currency in Path of Exile, this is going to be a great build for you. A second con is that it's got a slow burn. You will steadily gain profits over time, both in fossils and simply in raw currency drops. But if you're impatient and you really want to hit like some big turnaround, a short amount of time invested for a lot of currency gained, then this is probably not for you, right? This isn't a short get-rich-quick scheme. This is you put time into the build, you put time into darkness farming, and you will come out with currency, making currency left and right. Not necessarily the most amount of currency that you can make in the game, but it's consistent, right? So if you're a new player and you're going, hey, I've never had an Exalt drop, or I've never had more than 10x, or I've never had more than 100x, right? And you want to just work your way up towards maybe getting your first headhunter, or maybe towards completing a build or pushing a build past level 90, or you want to just have currency, or you just want to have a build that you can simply always go back to make you more currency without necessarily expending anything additional, you can do that with this Darkness Farmer. So what exactly do you need to do in order to Darkness Farm? Well, BrittleKnee's got a great explanation here, and I couldn't have written it better myself, so we're going to dive right in. Atypical of most builds, you will deal 0 damage once you transition your gear and passive tree to be a Darkness Runner. While able to take more than a few hits, you will dish nothing out in return. So this is a bit of a change in mindset, right? Where you're normally playing Path of Exile and you're normally running around killing monsters, and by killing monsters, they drop stuff, and that's how you make your currency. Darkness Farmers are essentially a pacifist way of making currency inside Path of Exile. So to prepare, you'll want to use your main character to scout out a few pathways while you are going about your normal delving business, which there is a guide featured on this forum post about how to choose a route. That's in the FAQ section, which, by the way, I don't think I've seen a better FAQ section, and this particular build creator, BrittleKnee, does a great job of responding to questions on stream, on YouTube, as well as on the forum guide. Once you've settled where exactly you want to farm, you'll want to find an adjacent nearby pathway that is too short to run and break a wall. This is the only time you will ever break a wall on this build. Breaking a wall here will help center the camera near the node where you are planning to farm for continuity. Once the camera is situated, it's now time to run. Scout your pathway, collecting everything you personally want to collect. Remember, do not break any of the walls or you will not be able to continue running your path, as it cannot respawn loot if walls are broken. Once you reach the end, you will log out and re-enter the game. You can do this manually or assisted through a logout macro. Remember, this is somewhat against the TOS for a macro to do more than one thing, so make sure you're using an approved macro. Re-enter the town, talk to Nico, and click on your path to return. This saves you the loading screen in the encampment. If you need flares, you'll zone in the usual way via waypoint. While running, you will spam your Enduring Flask until it can no longer sustain the incoming damage. Remember, with Enduring Flasks, you can queue the effect by rapidly spamming the flask, and the duration will last for as many charges as you feed into it. You will then tap Lavies periodically with increasing frequency until you are no longer able to sustain the incoming stacks of darkness damage. Once things are uncomfortable, simply throw a flare at your feet while you run to reset your stacks. So, that is a wonderful overview. For some of you, you're probably scratching your head at this point and going, wait a minute, how is it that you run through the darkness without taking any damage, while at the same time not killing any monsters and using flasks to stay alive? Well, this entire build revolves around running around in the darkness, which used to be available in Delve League, when Delve League had it such that you didn't necessarily constantly take damage from darkness farming. At one point, when darkness damage first came out in Delve League, there was actually a way to set it up such that you never took damage. You had such a little amount of HP in the health pool that you essentially wouldn't ever take damage until you were at just ridiculous, like hundreds amounts of stacks. So what people would do is they would use this particular mechanic to build a character that would essentially become invisible through phasing to characters and to monsters in and around Delve, so they would never target you to deal ability damage, and you would just run around with nothing ever targeting you except eventually the darkness killing you. That concept, while it's not true anymore in practicum, you eventually will die to the darkness stacks. You can reset darkness stacks by either throwing your flares or by going back onto the track that is available to you. Once you reset your darkness, you can go back again through the log-in, log-out mechanisms that are described right here. So there's tons of different ways to deal with darkness and with the damage that's coming into you, as well as building a build nowadays, which is required for you to actually take a hit or two, because monsters may actually aggro you every once in a while, and no one wants to get bothered with actually getting killed on a build that just wants to run around and click on fossil nodes and currency nodes. So we don't want to waste our time with actual deaths. We just want to run around and collect currency. That's the whole point of this particular build. Now, BrittleKnee does a great job of showing off how to level, exactly how to progress with this particular character. There's lots of different ways that you can level with a Scion. I'm simply going to leave it at that and then encourage you to check out exactly how to level on her particular description on the forum. Next up, we're going to take a look at the passive tree for this particular Scion. You are going to want to ascend with Pathfinder and Hierophant. The reason why you're going to go Pathfinder is, of course, for flask effectiveness. We are a very flask-dependent build as we are running through the darkness and collecting fossils and making money left and right, and so we want to be able to juice up our flasks as much as we can, and so of course Pathfinder is going to be able to do that for us. Also accompanying that, we are very mana reliant, and so as much mana as we can get onto our build in terms of increasing the percentage of mana that we've got is always nice, and then of course adding on that bonus 8% of damage taken from mana before life is like a mini MOM. That's also quite helpful to do. When you're looking at the passive tree for this particular build, mostly what you're going to see is reserved mana, flask effectiveness, and then occasionally some life and some resistances. In terms of strategizing how exactly you're going to fill out this tree, I would personally recommend not going for this exact tree until you are ready to actually darkness farm. So if you're leveling up, whether that's as an attack-based skill or a spell-based skill, level up to about level 80-ish, 85-ish. If you're looking to skimp out on some points, I would recommend skipping out on points in the Scion life wheel. You can simply avoid grabbing those points for quite some time as you are leveling, as your gear should get you through the 10 acts of the story relatively well. If you've got friends that you can play with in guild, of course, you can always just level up with them, essentially playing as their support or as an XP leech for a while. BrittleKnee even makes the suggestion, just tell your friends that you'll give them some of the fossils that you get when you start darkness farming. And you can make a trade in that regard for XP for fossils if you've got guildmates or friends that you'd like to help carry your character to a particular level limit. Of course, going in on the tree, important nodes are going to be mind over matter. This is very, very important for us to have an effective health pool going against the darkness. And then, of course, other than that, we're also going to want flask effect nodes such as arcane chemistry as well as essence extraction for our mana regeneration. Speaking of mana regeneration in our itemization, there's a couple of key uniques that we're going to be using. Now, the first key unique that we're going to be using is Queen of the Forest. You can see on this particular build there's 65,000 evasion rating, and that translates to a whole bunch of additional move speed. Basically, your chaos per hour as you are farming different fossils for this particular build is limited by your character's ability to move and your computer's ability to relog you as long as you've got loading screens getting into Delve. That's essentially the cap. Your move speed and your computer speed. So, how can you min-max your move speed? Well, getting a whole bunch of evasion and then going with Queen of the Forest is a great spot to go. Also, if you're using the Ichimonji sword, these unique swords give you a 10% increased buff effect for you. So this is great for all of your various buffs that you're going to have up while you're running around in the darkness. It is quite handy, and if you're dual wielding them, instead of having 10% increased of effect, you get 20% increased of effect. So it's quite a nice unique, and it's relatively budget at this point in the league, and it's relatively budget at the start of most leagues that are not melee oriented. You're also going to want a 7 league step. Of course, this is again to boost your speed as fast as you can. If you can't afford a 7 league step, I would simply recommend getting some rare boots that have got 30% move speed on them. The rest of the stats don't really matter. You can use something that you even leveled with if you didn't level with a 7 league step. Just something with resistances as well as some move speed would be nice for your character, because again, the whole point of the character is to be fast, and so you can min-max your build by increasing your move speed. Now, this particular Watcher's Eye is very, very important because it gives you mana recovery rate while affected by clarity. You're going to want to set your clarity level gem level to level 1. You don't need it to be very high because most of your mana is coming back from your enduring mana flask, or simply you're regenerating it because your Lavinia's is being used, which this particular unique flask, Lavinia's, says your skills have no mana cost during their flask effect. So that's quite nice. So you go in between using your Enduring Mana Flask and your Lavinia's in order to make sure that you're cycling your mana properly to be juggling the darkness damage that you're taking. But this Watcher's Eye is quite nice because essentially mana recovery is HP recovery with the amount of damage that you are taking from the darkness with MOM along with your hero font as well. This particular Militant Faith Jewel is somewhat of an expensive purchase. I'm going to leave it to you simply to look on the guide that BrittleKnee has got up for why this particular Militant Faith prismatic jewel is placed in its spot. Essentially, these various jewels, if you don't know what timeless jewels are, don't worry about it. It's not required in slot, but it is a relatively nice boost for a whole bunch of different quality of life on this particular build. Lastly, we're going to wrap up with your skills. You're going to want Phase Run, and then, of course, with that, you're going to want increased duration. You want Phase Run to be as often as you can because it boosts your move speed, and it also gives you phasing, which allows you to run through monsters without having to interact with them. And then, of course, you want Clarity, and if you can get your hands on a Vol Grace, those are cheap. You can always just use a regular Grace, but Vol Grace is great as well. Other than that, you see, there's not a 6 link on here, so it's a relatively cheap build. You can just get a really high roll on your Queen of the Forest, and away you go. Well, thanks so much for watching today. Hopefully, you have enjoyed this build as much as I have. I know for myself, I love me some darkness farming, so hopefully you will interact with this particular build and get into it and start up a darkness farmer of your own and see that there's all sorts of currency to be made if you're just willing to get down to about depth 200 and delve and then darkness farm your way to making your path of banking a wonderfully well-rolled bank filled with fossils that you can use for yourself for crafting or trade away. Thanks so much for watching our 7th episode of Build of the Week, and I hope today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you in the darkness of Delve. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.